I didn't have a particular interest in that. And so he asked me, he said, well, what are you passionate about? Like, what are your favorite subjects in school? I said, well, I love my Spanish class and I really love my public speaking class. And I like to write too. And he said, well, good. They just double major in Spanish and communication studies. I said, well, what do you know, my parents are going to ask, what do you do with that when you ultimately graduate? And he goes, don't worry about it. Just be passionate about what you do. Others will see that passion in you and the rest will work itself out.
If you can cast your mind back to when you're at school or college, how sure were you of what your career was going to look like in the near future, in the far future? For some of us, there was certainty from as long as we can remember about what our job was going to be and what we were going to do. Going to be an astronaut or a fighter pilot or something else, perhaps. But for many of us, we never had that certainty. And in some ways, that is an advantage. Hello and welcome to another episode of Leading with Integrity. And my guest today, Angela Burgess, can certainly identify with several of those issues, having gone from a college degree in Spanish and communications to the wealth management and financial industry, and then ultimately later leaving that industry for the world of non-profit, which is certainly a quite unconventional career trajectory. And there are some brilliant lessons in there about staying adaptable, about pursuing your passions, about leadership in differing contexts and commercial or not commercial environments, and many more things besides. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And if you ask Angela what she does today, the answer is she empowers others to change the world, to transform the world. She is now not only a best-selling author, the president and CEO of Broad Oaks Consulting, but is also an executive director of a non-profit and gives back to her community through a variety of volunteer work, including working with foster children. On Friday this week, it will be International Women's Day 2024. And so in celebration for the rest of the month of March, including this episode, I will be speaking only to leaders who are women. This month, we'll also see a landmark episode for this podcast. We'll be hitting triple figures. Our 100th episode will be coming towards the end of this month, and I've got something a bit different, a bit special planned. And I'm not going to spoil it. You're just going to have to keep listening for the rest of this month to find out more. So without further ado, let's get Angela on the show. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. It's going to delve into some very different industries to the ones that we've talked about in the past.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast.
Leadership talk for the modern manager.
With your host, David Hatch.
Angela, thank you for joining me today. It's great to have you on the show. Really looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you, David. I'm so happy to be here.
Happy to have you. And I'm going to let you kick us off as well. So if you could introduce yourself a bit to the listeners, tell them about your background, your businesses, and what you get up to today.
Sure. So I'm Angela Burgess. I am based out of Houston, Texas, though I originally hail from Iowa City, Iowa, which for anyone who's listening outside the U.S., that is a state in the middle of the country that we like to call a flyover state. Most people think that Iowa is famous for potatoes. That is not Iowa, it's Idaho. So we are infamous or famous for corn, soybeans, and hogs. Those are the big enterprises there in Iowa. I have been in Houston since 2014. I moved down here with my husband, and in 2018 started my own business, Broad Oaks Consulting. Our firm is dedicated to helping nonprofits leverage their messaging and their innate donor base to help them grow so that they can be around long term to continue to serve communities. That business really was born out of a combination of background that I have. So something perhaps a little bit unique about me. I went to college and double majored in Spanish and communication studies, which clearly led to a decades-long career in finance and wealth management. I mean, obviously you can see the connection between Spanish and communication and wealth management. I'm sure it's clear.
Yeah, very. Yeah.
And I did that for 10 years. And I always thought at some point, that you know, we have those thoughts that, later in life, I'm going to quit my job after I've made my millions and I'm going to do something really meaningful with my life and I'm going to give back. And that time for me came in my early 30s as opposed to in my 50s or 60s. And it wasn't that I had made my millions. It's just that I reached this point in my life where I realized that I wanted my life to mean more. I needed to do something more to help connect people and their money with things that are important in the world. And so I left the wealth management industry and I went to work for a nonprofit, and I was captive there for 7 years, 3 years in Chicago, and then 4 years here in Houston. I commuted back and forth and then did a lot of traveling. And then in 2018, I started my own business because I love fundraising. I love nonprofits, but to use my time and talent really on just one nonprofit, again, wasn't enough. I wanted to be able to use my expertise to help many nonprofits be able to grow and scale, increase their revenue, which is something most nonprofits struggle with, but then also serve more people to solve more problems. So I guess that's a really long-winded answer to your question.
Not really. No, I think it was on topic, wasn't it?
Thank you. You're kind.
Yeah, so I mean, going from Spanish communication studies to wealth management, I mean, you're right, that is it's not as obvious as it may seem. So how did you go from one to the other? I feel like there's a story in there somewhere.
There's a story everywhere. And I think that I kind of live my life in stories. Maybe I'm just obsessed with books or movies or whatever it is. But when we think about our lives, that's really it, right? And that's how we relate to each other. We relate to one another in stories, and it's how we conceptualize and understand the world. So when I was in high school and thinking about going to college, I really didn't know what to major in. And I've always been envious of people. Like my friend Cheryl growing up, she always knew she was going to be a veterinarian. My friend Alyssa always knew she was going to be an educator. And I had no idea. And so I really felt unsure about my path forward. And so at, the wise old age of 17 or 18, I was thinking about people I knew in my life who I felt like had been to college recently and then made great decisions about what to major in and gotten good jobs. And I knew this guy who was the friend of the son of some of my parents' friends. And he was about 5 years older than me. And of course, when you're 18, someone who's 23 seems like they're old and wise and very worldly. So I called him and I said, what should I major in? And my parents were pushing me, of course, towards business or finance, something practical. I didn't have a particular interest in that. And so he asked me, he said, well, what are you passionate about? Like, what are your favorite subjects in school? I said, well, I love my Spanish class and I really love my public speaking class. And I like to write too. And he said, well, good. Then just double major in Spanish and communication studies. I said, well, what do you my parents are going to ask, what do you do with that when you ultimately graduate? And he goes, don't worry about it. Just be passionate about what you do. Others will see that passion in you and the rest will work itself out. And it just made so much sense to me. Obviously, as I, raced down the stairs to tell my parents this brilliant idea and this is what I was going to do, they didn't quite see the logic that I did. But I did that. And then ultimately, so in Iowa, at the time I graduated from college, I went to a small private school in central Iowa. The largest employer in the state at that time was Principal Financial Group. And I wanted to work there because from where I come from, it's sort of a life best practice to join a firm that you will stay with for the rest of your life. A place you can go, a place that has good benefits, a place that has a pension. And at that time, Principal still had a pension too. So I applied for jobs out of college, didn't get them. And I submitted a resume every month for a year back to them. And they finally called and said, listen, we don't want you for any of the jobs you've applied for. However, we are looking for people to go out and visit our largest 401k clients. So those would be companies that have $25 million or more in their 401k plans. And we need people to present, so give public presentations to all the employees, from the very top to the very bottom, about enrolling in their 401k, understanding investing, and increasing their contributions. And we need someone to do it in Spanish and in English.
No way.
So I'm like, okay, here we go. Spanish, English, public speaking, perfect job. Off we go. And, then once you get someplace, you have to learn what you're going to talk about. So within 30 days, I got my Series 7 and my life and health license. And they put us through a very rigorous professional image and communication training so that at the ripe old age of 23, now I could go out and give presentations to people that were far more seasoned than me about their 401k and their investments and how to save for retirement and how to plan for retirement and all of that. So that was kind of where it started for me. I lasted about a year in that role. It was really travel intensive. I mean, you would leave Des Moines, Iowa, connect through Chicago, fly somewhere, get in maybe 8 or 9 o'clock at night, take a 2-hour nap, take a shower. And then because you have to hit all of the shifts, so everything from the night shift, the morning shift, the executive shift, the afternoon shift, for about a year, I only slept in 3 to 5 hour increments.
Ooh, that sounds pretty punishing. Yeah, I mean, it's funny though, isn't it, how life works sometimes? Because I mean, I think we can probably all think back when we were at school. There was always those 3 or 4 people who knew what they were going to do with their life, and that was that. And
it's such a benefit. Like I can't even imagine being so singularly passionate about one thing that I can just stay laser focused on that all the time, and that maybe other people have done it before you, so the path is already paved.
Yeah, possibly, but I think. So I was probably one of those people, I was adamant all the way through school what I was going to do. But I think where it falls over is if for whatever reason you end up not being able to do that thing. So for me, it was joining the Air Force, the military. Okay. Didn't happen for eyesight and fitness and economic context reasons at the time, and we won't go into it. But so once you get to that point where you've exhausted that option, and you've spent your entire teenage life with your eyes on that prize and preparing for it, actually, it can be quite difficult. You feel a bit lost on occasion. So I think not having that certainty of where you're going to end up actually can be quite an advantage, because it allows you to be a bit more flexible and adaptable to the situation and not necessarily fixed on a goal that you might not ultimately be able to achieve. Yeah. So I think in hindsight, I would have preferred to do it that way.
It's an interesting perspective. I think it's true. I think the other thing that it's when you don't know what you want to do, it does teach you resiliency, because you try different things. Maybe you succeed, maybe you don't, maybe you pick up a piece here or there of what you like. And I think for me, that's certainly been true. So I knew that there were certain aspects of that first job in wealth management that I really liked, that I was good at. And so I took those things and parlayed them into the next position, leaving behind the things I didn't like, which was really the travel, which was a lot. I was gone usually Monday or Sunday through Thursday. And you just don't have much of a life. And then by the time you get home at midnight on Thursday and you have to be in the office at 8 a.m. Friday, you spend all weekend sleeping, cleaning your house, and then doing it again, right? So I didn't love that part of it. I don't mind travel. I don't want to travel 4 or 5 days every single week. And I didn't like the inconsistency of sleep. I think it gets hard after a while. Just for me personally, I know lots of people do it. It just doesn't really work well with me. But then it does become easier, to your point. If you don't really have this path that you're laser focused on, you can kind of say, okay, well, this worked from here. Let's take those couple of things and parlay them into the next opportunity.
Yes. Yeah. I think there's something to be said for the pressure you put on yourself as well.
Yes.
You maybe feel more open to taking risks if you're not so worried about losing that one dream career you've always wanted to do.
Correct. Yes. 100%.
Yeah. And so having established that career, you then later ended up walking away from it. So what made you make that decision as well?
Yeah, so I started, like I said, in the education part of institutional 401k. Then I went into sales myself and started really financial sales, financial advisory work. And I love that. To this day, I can look back and tell you it was my favorite job that I've ever had. Not that I would necessarily go back to it at some point that I would want to, but I just had so much fun and I learned so much. And when we get into the leadership discussion, that's where leadership really started to stand out for me personally, and what makes a great leader and how we can be the best we can be to lead others around us. So I love that job. I ended up getting promoted from there and relocated to Kansas City to help grow their office. And their kind of their retail field office down there. And that was a great experience. So that was my first management experience. And I was 25, so it wasn't even that old when I moved down and started in that arena. And again, to your point, I learned so much. I didn't really have any expectations of what I should be doing. And so you just kind of jump in with both feet. Turned out I was good at recruiting, which is a benefit in wealth management, especially when you're in a manager, senior manager level role. And so I left that job. I got recruited to Smith Barney, one of the brokerage firms here. Later got bought out by Morgan Stanley. So I moved along this management path. Morgan Stanley and I weren't a great fit, so I ended up leaving and just wholesaling life insurance essentially to financial advisors for their top clients. So it was all wealth and estate transfer planning work, which I love. I really enjoy kind of the puzzle pieces of looking at someone's overall financial picture and saying like, okay, depending on what your goals are for if you own a business, for your family, how do we reposition your assets to be tax efficient for you to give the most benefit to whatever it is you're trying to benefit, your employees, your family, charities, and then restructure perhaps some of your assets to make that happen. And so I really enjoyed that puzzle and working with people. I think the thing for me was that when you're doing that kind of work, there can be great benefit in it because you're helping clients accomplish their goals. But I started to get into this, and I think maybe some of it is just my upbringing. You know, I like I said, I grew up in Iowa. I grew up in a really middle class family, very kind people, very involved with their church and somewhat in the community. But as I moved up myself in income and in social class, it's almost like things that were important to me about taking care of our communities and taking care of the least among us, those thoughts were just kind of getting lost. And all I can tell you is that really was almost a God moment. I came home from work one day from a trip and I set my suitcase down and my internal wholesaler called me and he's like, oh, we had a great day today. He's like, you made $25,000 today. And I didn't even feel excited. Like I didn't feel excited. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel accomplished. And I thought to myself, okay, so given your role, if this doesn't excite you or give you any motivation to want to go out and do it again, maybe you need to reevaluate. And I looked at I had this little slip of paper on my desk from a nonprofit in Chicago, Mercy Home for Boys and Girls. And it was just an appeal. You know, they had sent me a letter asking for a donation for Thanksgiving. And I just thought to myself, I think that God is calling me to do something different. And so I decided after about 6 months, I did some interviewing and a lot of thinking and a lot of praying that, you know, my licenses were good for 2 years. I'm going to leave the wealth management industry. And instead of working with people and their money to help them make more money, I'm going to work with people and their money to help them not only take care of their families, but take care of charities that they care for. So I left and it's all kind of the same work. It was just from a different vantage, right? So I left and I thought I have 2 years. If either I can't make it, I did take a 66% pay cut to do that. If either I can't make it or I hate it, I can always go back to wealth management. And I have never regretted going into philanthropy.
Well, fair enough. Yeah, so the philanthropy piece really interests me because we hear a lot in leadership circles and elsewhere generally in social media and all that about purpose first kind of careers these days. And so hard to think of a more purpose first example, isn't it? So yeah, I mean, what do you think of that whole movement? Do you think that's a bit of a fad, a bit of virtue signaling maybe, or do you think it's actually signaling a shift in people's priorities at work?
I think it's a little bit of, like you said, virtue signaling. You know, at the end of the day, we all have to make a living. We all have to support someone, whether it's just yourself, parents, siblings, spouses, children, whatever that is, right? We all have, or most of us do, I should say, we all have financial obligations. And I don't think that it's possible for all of us in our day-to-day work to pursue the thing that you're most passionate about. But what I try to get people to see is that sometimes it's a combination of things, right? So if you look at And part of the reason, I know we'll get to this, but part of the reason I wrote a book is the sheer volume of people I know and have met throughout my lifetime that hate their jobs. Like they absolutely hate their jobs. They hate going to work. And every day is about getting to that next vacation or getting to retirement or getting to some sort of, immediate reward, like concert tickets or that new outfit or whatever it is, right? And I do think that each of us has an opportunity to better focus in on our innate skills and abilities and align our work with that. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be something that's altruistic or I don't even like the term purpose driven necessarily. I think for some people that's okay. But for other people, I think it's more a matter of saying, what are you good at and what do you like doing? And then taking a separate look and saying, what are you good at, but you don't like doing, and get that stuff off your resume. Because I think that's the other thing too. We spend all this time building these skills throughout our lifetimes. And a good example for me is recruiting. I'm a great recruiter. I hate it. I just don't enjoy it. There are a lot of things that we become very good at and skilled at out of necessity. And then because we become good and skilled at them, we put them on our resumes, and then we end up in jobs we hate, doing stuff we hate. And when you think about it, it's because we told everyone we're really good at this, right? Instead of saying like, I'm just going to leave that off. I'm not going to mention it. And then I think the other thing is looking at what are the things that you're not good at, and certainly don't take jobs for things you're not good at, but what are things you're not good at, but you actually aspire to? So if there are those types of things that you're willing to work on where you say, you know what, maybe I'm not really good at editing video, but it's something I'd really like to be good at. So how do I put myself in positions where I can start to learn that skill and get paid for it? Almost like, everybody always says, don't pay for your MBA, get your company to pay for it. You can do that in any variety of different ways and not just formal education. When you think about like, okay, what are things I'm good at and that I like? What are the things that I'm not good at, but I really want to get better at? Build your resume and start your career search with those items. And I think that gives all of us, if you want to, purpose driven, sure, but it gives you a chance to really hone in on your gifts, your skills, and your abilities, and to create a life where you have more satisfaction and you feel like you're giving back to whatever it is, your company, your community, your career, in a way that you're best being utilized. And I think that's kind of the bigger thing. And listen, not everyone needs to leave their jobs and go work nonprofit. We'd have no people to work in for-profit, and we need for-profit.
Yeah, it's a good point about the CV as well, because you're right. I mean, we've all done that, haven't we? You get good at something because you're given that job to do without really being consulted. Yeah. And say, I got really good at that. I'll put it on my CV without thinking about, I actually hate that. I don't want to do that.
Yeah. And then the next job you get, you're doing more of that because no one else is good at it. And it's just the whole thing kind of cycles out of control.
Yeah. Yeah. And you just get stuck in it as well because you're the only one in the business who knows how to do that certain thing. And yeah.
And then, that's the other thing too. Then everybody says to you, oh, well, you're indispensable because of this. But do you really want to be indispensable for something that you dread doing every single day? Or do you want to become the person that you just kind of numb that feeling? And I think that's another thing too. We have become a society and a culture where it's like, hey, if feeling frustrated by your job, have a drink after work, take Zoloft or whatever it is, right? We're into this whole numbing thing instead of saying, why do I have these feelings that I need to numb, so to speak, to be able to get to the next day? And I think, and listen, I think there's definitely a place for medications in society. Don't get me wrong. I also love a good stiff drink every now and then too, but at the same time, it's not as a coping mechanism for not wanting to go to work the next day.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I think the whole purpose driven thing, I think you're right there as well. I think it's, as with all things, it's a question of balance, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is a luxury, I think, to be able to just chuck in a job you hate and go and do something because you believe in the purpose or the mission of that company, or because it's a non-profit that you want to be involved with. If we take as read that you're going to get paid enough to pay your bills, then beyond that, it's going for the jobs and the companies that you believe in and you want to work for. And that's where we can get into leadership and vision and all of that sort of thing. Well,
and I think too, that's where, you have to think about what are you doing in your free time? So maybe you don't have the opportunity to create a new program, or to, you don't have the freedom to do something in your work life. What could you do with a nonprofit in your free time on a volunteer basis to not only exercise that creativity or spirit of entrepreneurship that perhaps you inherently have, but you can't utilize in your day-to-day life? Because what I've seen in the nonprofit community, I mean, nonprofits are itching, dying for people who want to have a positive impact, but that are willing to take on the responsibility for it. So it's fascinating to me I've been a nonprofit now since 2011. How many people have these great ideas and they come to a nonprofit and they say, you should do this. Well, nonprofit professionals are stretched thin as it is. 92% of nonprofits in the United States operate on a budget of less than $1 million a year. And so they do a great job. Most executive directors and development directors of smaller agencies are already working 50 to 60 hours a week. So when a well-intentioned volunteer, donor, board member comes to them and says, hey, I have this great idea, you should do it, what would be a true gift is if that person were willing to take ownership over it. And I think that's where we can think about our lives and our balance. And if there is something that you aspire to do, where could you do that where it's actually going to add impact and give you the experience that you're seeking?
Yes. Yeah, I like that actually. You could look at if we take the non-profit bit out of it, whatever your purpose, whatever the thing is that you get really passionate about, even if you're not in a position to quit your current job and go and do it, you're right, leverage your free time. Pick up the skills you need in order to quit your job and go and do that.
Yeah. Which I think is great. And I think the other thing too is acknowledging how much capacity you have. Because I think about, and I talk a lot about, I have a really good friend, we've been friends since we were 3. She has a million things she wants to do, but she works full time in education and she has 4 children. So right now, maybe the max that she can do is every day make a commitment to give someone a compliment or smile at someone at the grocery store or, help someone in a small way, because she's juggling 4 children and a full-time job and a husband and everything else, right? And so acknowledging where you're at in your life in that whole cycle. But that's the thing about life, is it continues to change. Your children will grow up. They will hopefully, God willing, leave the house at some point and become independent adults of their own. And so as your time continues to shift and change, think about what are things I've always wanted to do. And if you, like you said, even if it's something you've never done before or something you want to return to, there's always a place where you can fit that in. You just have to make it a priority. Yes,
priority. That's the key word, isn't it? Prioritization, definitely. Yeah, I think it's something everyone will always struggle with. There's no way out of that. But anyway. So you mentioned the book. It'd be remiss of me not to ask, first of all, what prompted you to write it? And second of all, what's it about? Tell the listeners.
So my whole life, every time I talk to somebody, whether it's about my career or my personal life, they're like, oh my gosh, you should write a book. Because I, haven't followed this kind of traditional career path and I have different thoughts and ideas. And to your point, I have a little bit more freedom in my thought process. And I don't know why. I just always have been a little bit of a free spirit, I guess, since I was younger. But it really came about for me. I was asked to speak to a group of high school students in a program here in Houston called Atlas Scholars. I love this program because they don't select necessarily, what you would call the top kids in every class. They select students who are really hard workers, who are trying very hard, who really want to do something amazing with their lives. And it's a really cool program. Anyway, they do this speaker series over the summer where they bring different speakers in to talk to the kids, just to give them exposure to different industries and different types of people. So they asked me to come in and speak on entrepreneurship. So I came in, I gave my whole speech on entrepreneurship. And at the end of the hour, the kids get a chance to ask questions. The first question that one of the kids asked me was, what do you do when your parents want you to pursue something practical in college, but it's not something you're really passionate about? And I immediately thought like, oh my gosh, that's me, right? That was what was happening to me. And so the whole idea of the book came about because I thought to myself, first of all, I realized that after talking to these kids for an hour about entrepreneurship, my path to entrepreneurship was far more interesting than my actual job itself. So missed the mark there a little bit with them. And so I wanted to put that down on paper, but then secondarily, I wanted to be able to inspire not just young generations of kids going to college and thinking about what they're going to do, but like you and I just talked about, I wanted to inspire people who are, and I used the bus term. Did you read that book by Jim Collins, Good to Great? Came out in 2003. So he talks about, it is a book predominantly about leadership, and he talks about being in the right seat on the bus with the right people. And that book came out right when I graduated from college. And I remember thinking to myself, this really makes a lot of sense, but it really stuck with me. And as time has passed, I've realized that it's not just about being on the bus in the right seat with the right people. It's about being on the right bus to begin with. I mean, sometimes they are the right people. They all know where they're going. And you just realize, like, I don't even want to go where these people are going. What am I doing? Why am I even on this bus? But the cool thing, and so the whole book has this kind of bus theme to it, because I think what people miss is that if you're on the wrong bus, it turns out that's why they have that cord, right? This is what you do when you're on a bus and you want to make the next stop. You pull the cord, you get off at the next stop. And so I was thinking about that in combination with this speaking opportunity. And I thought, okay, so if I can help some of these younger minds realize that you have an opportunity here, you don't have to go the practical route. There's a happy medium to be had in there somewhere. But if I could also inspire people to stop and think about where they are and how they got there, and if they still really want to be there, and if they don't, give them some encouragement and give them some ideas and give them some, courage to be able to say, you know what, I think it's time for me to pull the cord and look for a new bus or a new bus line or go to a different bus station altogether.
Going back to the conversation we had at the beginning, and then in the context of talking to students and future workforce, to stretch and test your analogy even further, you don't have to decide which bus you want to be on when you're 15.
That's right?
It. I think there's so much, at least there was for me when I was that age at school. You feel the pressure of you.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of glad actually in a way that I did have the idea of where I wanted to go. But if I didn't, the pressure they put on you to decide what career you want, even at that early stage, when know nothing about the workplace, you couldn't possibly make an informed decision.
Yeah.
It's
I think it is one of the craziest things to me that we're asking people whose brains aren't even fully formed yet to make a decision about what education they're going to get to lead to a career for the rest of their lives. I mean, gratefully, we do have liberal arts colleges. And at the end of the day, one thing I've noticed is that if there are any kids listening to this, no one cares what you majored in. I mean, unless you're going to be a doctor, really, or rocket scientist, right? Like that sort of thing. Even a lawyer, it doesn't matter. You don't have to get an undergrad in poli-sci. It's helpful, but it doesn't particularly matter. So unless it's some sort of specialization, what employers care about the most is that you went to college, that you had the tenacity to finish, and that you did something else while you were there, whether it's volunteering or, extracurricular activities, that you were somehow involved within your community. No one really even cares that much about your GPA. And I think that's something too, we put so much emphasis, and it does matter, GPA matters in high school, but it's far less important in that college experience as well. So again, unless you're specializing in a certain area, I think we place so much emphasis on that. And I don't know what your experience has been, but my experience is that 3 years out of college, no one cared. I mean, I have this recurring dream. This is hilarious, that I didn't graduate from high school, but that I have a college degree. Because I think the truth is that no one actually cares at a certain point in your life that you finished college or what you majored in.
I think you're right. It's funny. Very similar experience. I think at each stage of education, once you're through that door, you're never asked again about the previous one. So I got to have our equivalent of high school, got into, we call it college, but I guess it's the 2 years before what Americans would call college or university.
Right.
So once I got out of high school and into that, nobody ever asked me again what my grades were back then. Once I got from that into university, nobody ever asked me about those grades ever again. Once I graduated university and got my first job, nobody really cares beyond that either. They just, what was your last job? How long were you there for? What were your responsibilities? And I think in this country as well, I don't know if it's the same in the States, but we've almost swung back and forth on the value of a degree even. And there's been periods, recently as 3 or 4 years ago, and I think it's swinging back again now, where employers actually cared very little about whether you had a degree or what that degree was in, again, unless it was in a specialism that you have to have it.
Yeah.
And it was more about your work history, and most employers actually would rather have someone with 2 years work experience in the right industry than a degree and no work experience at all.
Yeah.
And so that kind of swings back and forth quite a lot as well. And it's funny, and it makes it all a bit absurd, doesn't it, about how much pressure and importance they put on it when you're at school. Like, your whole future depends on this, guys. Don't get it wrong now, or you'll just, that's it forever. And it's rubbish. Absolutely rubbish.
I took, so I volunteer as a court-appointed guardian ad litem, which is working with foster kids here in Houston. And one of my kids got adopted. Her parents are young. They're busy. They have other kids. So I've been taking her on college visits. And on one of our college visits, we were on the visit with another young woman from kind of North Dallas here. She looked depressed. I mean, it was so obvious she did not want to be there. So when it was kind of a smaller group, I was walking beside her and her mom, and I said, no offense, but it's pretty obvious you do not want to be here. And so we kind of got to talking, and it was exactly what you're talking about. She doesn't know what she wants to do. She doesn't know what she wants to be, and she's feeling all of this pressure. And I just said, I have no idea what her parents were telling her, but I just said to her, like, listen, whatever you decide now, you can change your mind later. You can go back to college. You can take a gap year. At the end of the day, there's all this pressure. Like, somehow, if you don't go to uni immediately after high school, that you're going to be so far behind, but you're not. It's a year of your life. And I think the older you get, the more perspective you have about that. And you're going to gain, hopefully, some sort of experience in that gap year anyway. And I just told her, I said, at this point in my life, I've had basically 3 different careers. And they've all built on one another. But the best part, especially here, is that you can constantly reinvent yourself. You can take everything that you've learned, everything you like, and build on that and continue to move forward. But I know it feels that way right now, that you have to choose this life direction that's going to define every single minute of your life moving forward. But that's actually not the case at all. And her mom was very much in agreement too. And I think it kind of helps for her to hear it from somebody outside, but they get it at school. I will tell you, there is no conversation here in the US that maybe you don't need a 4-year degree, because it's such a money-making thing. I mean, these universities tuition has gotten egregious. I think I read the other day that tuition is 20 times more expensive for this current generation than it was for their parents. I mean, that's insane.
Yeah, it's a very similar story here as well.
And it is interesting too, I think. So when I think about clients that I work with, I really am attracted to social service nonprofits, because when you think about problems that we have as a society, the group of organizations that are rising to the occasion and answering the call really are social service nonprofits. I've done some work with universities. It's not my passion. To your point, it's, that we have these huge endowments and scholarships, and you still have people struggling to get into college and then racking up student loan. It's just, I probably don't fully understand it, full disclosure, but at the same time, it's just not, for me, it's not where my passion lies.
So let's go back to the nonprofit then.
Yeah.
So running and working with nonprofits, how does that compare to the private sector? What are the biggest similarities and differences, do you think?
So the biggest similarity, I love that you asked that, is they're both businesses. And in some ways you can't say that, because people say, well, it's a nonprofit, it's not a business. So technically, if you're looking at the tax qualification of a nonprofit, it does have a different tax status than a for-profit business. But if you look at the number of people that nonprofits employ, if you look at the overall structure, at the end of the day, so a business identifies a need within society, right? And whether it's a good or a service, they produce something to fill that need, and then people buy that product or service to fill the need or perceived need that they have. It's the exact same in the nonprofit world. So nonprofits, or people who start them or run them, are identifying a need in the community, and then they're raising funds. So that's the investment part, in order to meet that need. And so both are paying employees, both are investing or should be investing in marketing and communications. They're very, very similar. So to me, the biggest similarities is, when I started in management at 25 for a financial services firm, the goal was to help advisors grow their business. So I learned very quickly how to work with people, how to lead people to help them grow their business and grow their revenue. That was my job. That is an easy experience to bring over here, because it really is it's the same concept. The disconnect, so when you kind of look at what's different, is that businesses continue to invest in marketing and communications and product development, product improvement, and invest in their people. In the nonprofit world, the vast majority of nonprofits are not investing in marketing. They're not investing in communication. They're not investing in their people. They're not looking at their structure, their services, and how they can streamline and be more efficient. So all of the things that are true for for-profit businesses, you take all of those people and you put them on these nonprofit boards, and then they make entirely different decisions for nonprofits than they would make for for-profits. So I think that, to me, has been kind of the fun part in working with these organizations, is helping them see, like, listen, if you want different results, you have to treat your nonprofit within reason, right? Because there's not an endless supply of money, the same way as you would your for-profit business. An example I always give is, if you look at Apple or Nike or Microsoft, these are huge companies, but just because Apple has the corner on telephones, do they stop advertising the iPhone? No. So it's the same thing with nonprofits. The number one thing that we hear from nonprofits is, we're the best kept secret in our community. Well, that's because you put one ad in a magazine one time and then never did anything again. It's that repetition, the same way that for-profits have. So if you want people to know who you are, to trust in your brand, and to want to invest in your solution, first of all, you have to make them feel like they're a part of your solution. So like, if I put on a pair of Nike tennis shoes, I feel like I'm part of their brand, right? If I give to a nonprofit, that nonprofit better make me feel like I'm part of the solution. So it's a combination of that customer care, donor stewardship, marketing, and just taking everything that I learned from the for-profit industry and moving it, shifting it such that it works for nonprofit organizations.
I guess if you were to boil it down, it's the similarity is in the operations, I suppose, and then the difference is in how the money is spent, or where the money is spent.
Correct.
Nice. Good.
Yep.
I'm glad I'm with you. Good.
No, you're 100% there. It's just, it's a different mindset. And I think I love America. We're one of the most generous, we are the most generous nation with nonprofits. And the average giving from Americans is 2 to 3% of their income, which is greater than any other country out there, which is fantastic. But the reality is that we could all do a little bit more. And I'm not even suggesting that we give more. Kind of going back to our conversation earlier, what could you do in your free time? Because nonprofits are short resource. So do you have a few hours a month that you could give some of your time and expertise to really help an organization that you're passionate about, or a cause you're passionate about in your community? So I think when you kind of look at it that way, people have this attitude like, well, I give to nonprofits, but I also want to enjoy my life, which you 100% should. But especially here, there's this attitude like, oh, well, I pay taxes and the government takes care of that. And I understand that, and I don't disagree, but I think what people miss is that our taxes create allocations, and then that money, to get that money from the government to the people or animals or whoever needs it, nonprofits apply for that money through grants, and then they're still the ones that administer it. So a lot of people think like the nonprofit community doesn't impact them. But if you were born in a public hospital, if you've ever gone to a public hospital, if you participated in public education in any way, shape, or form, if you went to a public university, If you go to a park, if you ever go for a walk in a park, your life has been impacted by a nonprofit. If you live in a community where there isn't a high degree of homelessness, if you live in a community where there's not a lot of food insecurity, all of that is brought to you by the nonprofit world, right? Because for-profits aren't out there doing that work. It's where the nonprofits are deciding, like, listen, these are issues. Human trafficking is an issue. Food insecurity is an issue. Homelessness is an issue. Mental health is an issue. And they're responding to that call. So if you enjoy being able to walk up and down your streets without having to worry about, a homeless population or mental health issues or whatever it is, that's something that you need to think about. Like, this is afforded to me by good people who care enough to want to structure their lives and their businesses around solving some of these bigger issues. Because the government is not solving those bigger issues, especially in the state of Texas.
No, and neither are the private companies. Yeah. Otherwise, you'd have to pay on entry, probably, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
You want to go and play in this park? Okay, that'll be $50, please.
Exactly. Exactly. That's it. And it's just, I think if we all kind of stop to think about it a little bit more, and that's kind of one of my goals. I want to bring some more awareness to this and help people think about it. And like I said, it's not even a matter of giving of your resources, your financial resources. I think there are all ways in which we can be better stewards of our communities and better stewards of the nonprofit community. And some of that is just being aware of how much work and how much impact. I mean, Houston is home to, I think, 33,000 nonprofits. It's way too many, right? But at the same time, there's so many great things that happen in our community because of that. Yeah,
that is a lot. I wonder what the average is for the average city. I don't know if that is a lot or it just sounds a lot.
It's a little high. It is high. It is a little bit high over here. And you hear different ranges. I mean, I had heard pre-pandemic, it was 27,000, post-pandemic 24. And then most recently I heard 33. Some of it is that you also have to look, like, when you measure nonprofits, you're really just measuring who's filed for one. So they may not actually be funded or active. So we really have no way of telling how many active nonprofits there are in the area, but there are a lot. And there's kind of two sides to it. On one hand, the business person in me is all about consolidation and saying, like, hey, we should kind of do M&A in the nonprofit world the same way we do in the for-profit world. The flip side of that is that every organization brings its own unique perspective and skill. And if you think about a free market, so when people say, like, well, there's too many nonprofits that serve homelessness. Well, that would be like saying, well, we already have Nike shoes, so we don't need Adidas or Fila or anything else. So there is a little bit of a free market enterprise in there too. So I think that people should have a choice of where they're giving their funds. And especially when whatever you're giving, your time, your talent, your treasure, you should have a choice and be able to align with where you think the greatest impact is.
I agree. And I think there's a lot to be said as well for smaller organizations in that kind of sphere, because it enables the people who actually care about it, who are contributing their time, to feel closer to what's happening on the ground, as it were. Whereas I feel like if you take the big business approach and merge it into some big city or nationwide conglomerate, I think you lose a lot of that.
I see.
It's the same reason why I love small businesses and not so big on the big corporate.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's interesting. Let's talk about leadership then. First question I have for you on this one. What's the biggest leadership lesson that you've learned in your career so far?
So my biggest leadership lesson, and it's in my book, is that true leaders distinguish themselves really in one way. They do what they say they're going to do when they say they're going to do it. That's it, right? You're accountable for things that you've committed to. You're accountable for the people that you've committed to. And time and again, I guess if you boil it down, I think I've written a number of blogs about this. It's just show up. Leaders show up. They show up when it's easy. They show up when it's hard. You just continue to show up over and over again. I actually have, I don't know if I shared this with you or not, I have a list of 57 leadership principles I try to live my life by every day. People keep telling me I should whittle it down to like 5. 57 seems like a good number for me. It is. But when you kind of look at all of those leadership qualities together, that's really what it boils down to. You do what you say you're going to do when you say you're going to do it. You show up.
57 is a lot to remember.
It's nice to have a list though, because I can go back. I mean, so many of them I can repeat off the top of my head, but at the same time, when I'm struggling with something, I can go back to that list and find that principle to help guide me through whatever situation that I'm in, or to help guide a client through that situation. So it really came from, if you go back to, like I said, that first job that I had in the financial services industry. So I'm 23. I looked more like I was 12. And my job is to go out and talk to people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s about their retirement and get them to invest in their plans. So wisely, the company put me and my coworkers through a professional image and communication training. And the gentleman who ran the training was a retired Navy SEAL. And it was a very intensive 3 days. He definitely used that mentality to break you down, to build you back up. In a very traumatic way for some people. We had one girl in our cohort that left and almost didn't come back because she was so upset by the tearing down piece. But throughout the 3 days, he interspersed these leadership principles. And very long story short, I had the opportunity to go through that training 3 different times in my career. So I probably have, 150 of these realistically to go through. But for me, it kind of boils down to those 57. But I think I learned so much in that early phase of my life. I think when you're in your early 20s, you're really absorbing as much information as you can. I think it's interesting over time. I meet people later on in their careers who feel that they don't need any more professional development. They don't need any more connections. They don't need any more friends. It's a really foreign concept to me. And part of that goes back to our earlier conversation. For me, I like to know as many people from as many walks of life as I can, because if I decide to do something different, or if someone calls me and says, hey, I'm thinking about something, do you know anyone who? I just like to have that information out there. It's something that just makes me feel more confident and more resourceful. Plus, to your point earlier, we're talking about what are the similarities between for-profits and nonprofits. I think the more people you know, the more you start to see the interconnectedness of the world, and you can learn something from manufacturing that you can utilize in pharmaceutical sales. I mean, there's all kinds of different connections out there. Anyway, all that to say, when it comes to leadership, I learned so much about the qualities of a leader in that initial training. And then over time, becoming a leader and then working with other people who were wonderful leaders to me. I really just do believe, and I love the phrase that you use, integrity in leadership, because I think integrity is probably the single most important quality that any of us can have as leaders.
Well, I'm not going to disagree with that, obviously. I think so. Going back to you're distilling it down into one simple rule, that's much easier for me to remember than 57, because I have one of those kind of brains. I think, I do really like that. And I think that speaks to integrity itself as well, is right. Doing what you said you were going to do. I would add probably the aspect around the values, the authenticity piece, because I think, for me, authenticity is a buzzword these days, isn't it? And everyone has an opinion on what it means. For me, what it means is those 3 things all match up. They're aligned with each other. So your values, what you espouse as this is what I do, why I do it, how I do it, that, what you actually say, what you're going to say you're going to do, what you say about your values, and then what you actually do in practice.
Right.
If any one of those things doesn't match up to the other 2, then you've got an authenticity problem.
Yep.
And that is very, very central, I think, to integrity as well. And, with integrity, you could maybe add the bit about whether you still do all these things when no one's watching, and whether you're really living it. And it's a massively interesting concept to me, which is partly why the podcast has the name it has.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting about the Navy SEAL training as well. I have to say, I'm not a fan of the break them down to build them up approach. Yeah. I think if you're in the military, okay, fine. That's a very specific circumstance where that fits and makes sense. But
I think, I think that's another thing too. There's so many things I've done with my life. I just didn't know any better. I mean, even getting my Series 7 license, I had 2 weeks to study for that. So I had 1 week of self-study and then a 1 week course, and then I took the class. I passed the test on the first try, and I remember calling my dad and telling him, hey, I passed my Series 7. And my dad said, "You're a stockbroker?" And even then I go, "No, I don't think so." I mean, I just had no idea. All I knew is that it was something I needed to get to do my job. And I think it was the same thing with that training. All I knew was that I needed to go through it, and I'd never had an experience like that before. And what I learned is that in the breaking down phase, don't take yourself too seriously. We all have room for improvement. And I thought the outfit I had on was amazing, and I quickly learned it was not, but it was an opportunity for me to do better the next day, right? And I think if we think about that and it's harder the older you get and the more experience you have, but I think that if we all approach every day as not taking ourselves that seriously and that we have something to learn, that's even an outstanding leadership quality to demonstrate.
Oh, yeah, 100% agree with that. Yeah, I mean, you can probably tell I don't take myself too seriously already. If not, I don't. There we go. Yeah, I mean, I've no doubt that there was some useful and relevant leadership lessons in there. I guess it's just more the general approach that maybe I wouldn't like so much.
A lot of people don't. It's really uncomfortable for a lot of people. I think again, it's just like if you don't know any better. I mean, that's one of the principles was, if I knew better, I would do better. It's one that I still really like.
Yeah, fair enough. And I also agree with you about the always being open to more learning, more experiences, broader network, more friends, all of that sort of thing. Okay, so next question for you. What's been your best experience of being led?
So my best experience, I love this story. When I left that job and the traveling job and went into sales, I was really good. The reason they thought I'd be good at sales is that my numbers in terms of getting people to enroll in their 401k plans and increase their contributions were off the charts. They were really, really high. So they thought, oh, you'd be good at sales. I went into the sales department, and there were like 60 people in this department, and every month I was in the bottom 5. Like, I could not figure it out. And we had these, they were called call performance reviews, CPRs, every week, every other week with our supervisor. And I would go into them, and they recorded all our calls. So they would pull calls and you'd listen to them with your supervisor. And every week it was like, everything I'm doing wrong, I'm not going to make it, I may need to start looking for other employment. I mean, it got to the point where like the night before I would throw up, I would cry before I go to the office. After it was over, I go to the bathroom and cry. And that's like the last time I ever cried at work. Anyway, one day my supervisor was out. And so another supervisor came in, and in the span of like 12 minutes, I mean, these were, 30-minute sessions, but we were done in like 10 or 11. He had pointed out to me kind of everything I was doing right. And it helped me rethink really who I am in relation to these folks. And he had built so much confidence in me in just this short period of time. I remember he asked me, he said, you're not on my team, but I've kind of observed you over the last few months. He said, you seem to really absorb information, you know our products inside and out. And I said, yes, this is something that's important to me. And he said, you also seem to really care about people. And I said, I do. Back to the friendship thing, right? Like, all of my clients become my best friends. So I said, yeah, I really do. And he goes, well, let me ask you something. He's like, who do you think knows more about investing? You or the guy who's been working on the factory line for 50 years? And I said, well, me. And he goes, and who do you think in our department cares more about that person that they've never met? And that's kind of a weird question, because then you sound a little bit arrogant if you say no one cares more than I do. But I do know, how much I care about people. And I said, I think I care the most. And he goes, okay, so since you care about people deeply, you're never going to do anything intentionally to hurt them, and you have this huge wealth of knowledge that they don't have, let's approach it from that perspective. And it shifted the conversations that I started having with people, but it shifted the way I thought about myself. And that was a huge turning point for me. And I'll give him a shout out. I owe it to John Gergen for really helping me see that. I ended up transferring to his team, and within like 3 months, I was in, the top half of the department. And then shortly thereafter, I made it into the top 10, and I think I never left the top 5 or top 10 the entire time I was there, because I had just kind of a different way of thinking about it. And the way that he approached that situation and really helped me see my value was just an aha leadership moment.
I also love that story for two reasons. One, because it really shows the impact that leadership can have. And when you swap the narrative and turn away from that negative reinforcement that so many managers think is leadership and flip it actually to more of that coaching, positive reinforcement, encouragement, support kind of approach, the difference that makes in your personal experience, it's, crying to in the top 10. I mean, you can't, you can't think of a better example than that, I suspect.
And it became fun. I think that's the other thing too. When you're a great leader, you empower people to harness their skills and their abilities to believe in themselves and then to start to self-achieve, right? So I needed John's guidance early on. I needed his support for me to be able to grow and get to that point. But that's why I transferred to his team. I just got better and better and better. And then eventually, I think a really good leader helps you reach the point where it becomes self-motivated rather than others motivated. And I think when you're first starting to work with people, they're very much dependent on you as their leader. But if you do a really good job, over time, they become dependent on themselves to continue to lead themselves forward.
I can't remember who said it, but one phrase that I feel is quite relevant here is the best leaders are the ones who make themselves redundant. Because they've built up their people to that point that they're
I love that.
Self-sustaining, effectively.
I'm going to write that down.
Anyway.
I think that's really true. I really do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's not just that you do it by accident either, that it's intentional and that is your stated goal as a leader.
That's my stated goal as a leader has always been, I mean, this may be my new one. Let's borrow that one from you. It's always been to help people achieve beyond what they ever thought possible. And it is the same thing, right? Because once they get to that point, they realize that they can do it and they can do it over and over and over again without your help.
So on that note, what would be your best piece of advice for a new manager or a first-time leader?
Listen. If you are a new manager, you need to spend all of your time listening to the people that you are managing. And eventually you will get from manager to leader, but you can only get there if you really understand your people, their needs, and what you can do to help. I mean, your job I flagged this in my book. I think a great manager will equip you with the tools and resources needed to succeed, right? So if we think about if you're a manager and you're going in and you're talking to someone and you realize that they have a need, you tell them like, oh, well, we have these things available to help you, right? But a great leader will teach you how to leverage the tools and resources to generate outcomes. So it's not as much about, yes, they need to know that the tools are available, but then how do they use those to streamline whatever it is that they're trying to do? I think as leaders, our job is to remove barriers for people. So not just say, well, you have all the tools and resources at your disposal, but what barriers need to be removed, and whether that's something that, like me, maybe it's something that the person believes about themselves, the obstacle in their mind about what they can achieve. Maybe that's the barrier. Maybe it's someone on their team. Maybe there's the wrong person on their bus. Maybe they just haven't been connected, or they don't see an opportunity within their business for something new. So I think as a new manager, rather than trying to demonstrate your knowledge, your skills and abilities, listen, spend time getting to know your people, understand their needs, and then help them, connect them with resources, remove the barriers. I know my husband hates this saying, but it is so true. No one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And for people to know how much you care about them, you have to listen to them. And it's one of the hardest things to do, isn't it? Like, we all want to talk. I mean, I've just spent an hour telling you how great I am and how I'm doing all those things in my business. We all love to talk about ourselves, but that's what we have to remember as leaders. The people that we're leading, they want to talk about themselves. And when we open up that space for them, that's where we really figure out how to best serve them.
Yeah, definitely. But also, I think nobody really enjoys working for the kind of leader who only talks about themselves.
Exactly. We're trying to demonstrate our competency.
Yeah,
the
exactly.
best way to demonstrate competency is to help other people achieve what they're trying to achieve.
Yeah, exactly. No one's going to enjoy working for that giant ego monster, so don't give them the impression that that's who you are.
Leadership Heroes.
If you had to pick one person, and it could be anyone you like, alive or dead, past or present, real or fictitious, who in your opinion would perfectly embody leadership, who would that person be and why?
I really had to give some thought to this because I think there have been so many great leaders in my life, so many people that I think are wonderful leaders that I aspire to be like, that I follow and I read their books. And I feel like this is probably going to come out sounding kind of corny, but I don't care. When I really started thinking about who I know who embodies all of these qualities, to be honest with you, it's my husband. So I met my husband at work. We met at Smith Barney years ago. And even then I think he was easy to work with. I mean, we met professionally and dated much, much later. He was easy to work with because our leadership styles aligned. But the reason is, and I actually wrote some of this down. First of all, he's always objective. He's far more objective than I am. He sees the best in everyone, whereas I'm immediately seeing what is it that they're trying to get out of it. And because he's so objective, he sees things that oftentimes even I don't see. He sees the potential in people. And I think that's something as a great leader, and we talked a little bit about this, that's where he and I always aligned. I always want people to achieve beyond what they ever believed that they could achieve. And he sees that, but he never puts a cap on people, right? They can always do more. But the other thing with him is that I'm one of those people that I want people to keep going. Whereas he can say, but you know what? This is as far as David wants to go. This is David's place, and I'm going to support David in that spot. And I think that's also a great leadership quality, is to recognize that it's not about him and what he wants for you. It's about you and what you want for yourself. He realizes that his role is to support people, but also sometimes people need checked. Like their egos can get a little big. They can get a little difficult. And so he doesn't have a problem saying to people like, listen, you're not getting this because you haven't earned it. And I think that leaders want to be liked so much that delivering hard news can be difficult. And you have to get really comfortable delivering those hard messages in any situation. I will say this about him. He never stops learning. I think that's a great leadership quality to have. When I met him, the man was terrible at public speaking and would not get up in front of a group of people. And he's really worked hard on it. And I think that's hard to do the older we get, to say, hey, I'm going to develop this new skill, or even acknowledging that maybe we're not as good at something as what we thought we were. He celebrates people. I think this is important too, to celebrate people's wins and to appreciate them. But he's also fiercely protective of his people and anyone who's close to him. There was one of the principles in there is that a great leader always passes on more credit than they're due, and they take on more blame or responsibility than they're owed. And I definitely see that in my husband, and that's part of protecting your people, right? Is to help make them shine, to prop them up and to help them be the best they can be visibly, but also if they make a mistake, ultimately that mistake comes back to your leadership quality and owning that and acknowledging it. And then my last one, and I know this is crazy because I kind of made this list. I think a great leader is never concerned about their own glory. And I look at my husband, and he's never concerned about being recognized, being rewarded, being honored. He just shows up every day and wants to help the people around him be the very best that they can be, whatever that means to them.
Perhaps controversially, but I always enjoy the picks for this question that have a personal or a family connection. I think they're a bit more meaningful than picking a random person from 300 years ago that you've never met and don't really know. That feels a bit harsh on some of my former guests, but you know what I mean. It's more meaningful because you've actually seen them in action.
Well, and to your point too, the leading with integrity, you said it earlier, it's what we do when people aren't looking. Mm-hmm. And I think when you get that intimate view, whether it's in a personal relationship or professional, I mean, I see my husband at his worst when he comes home from work. and I see what kind of person, it makes me tear up a little bit, but I see what kind of person he is when he's not public facing, and I'm the only person that's ever going to know.
Mm.
And so when I thought about that question, a lot of people, to your point, people from 300 years ago, people whose books I read and blogs I read and podcasts I listen to. Yeah, I think they're great leaders, but I don't know them. I don't know what they're doing when no one else is looking.
Exactly. Two other things I'll pick out of there that I quite like, because they're maybe not the controversial sides of leadership, the bits that people maybe don't always want to face or admit that that's part of their job as a leader, is sometimes being unpopular and people not liking you. That one is really difficult for a lot of leaders to deal with. And then also, I guess it's kind of related to it, but it's not just building people up, but also being honest and objective in your feedback and explaining when they've gone the wrong way, or their behaviour's not been up to standard, or they've had a bad impact on one of their colleagues. Things like that, the kind of conversations that a lot of managers will tend to avoid that conversation entirely rather than confront it, because it is a confrontation. It doesn't have to be a confrontation, though, and it doesn't have to be unpleasant. It doesn't have to be done rudely, abruptly, without kindness. There are still ways to do it. The important thing is actually having that conversation, because it is an important one. And if you don't do it, your whole team will suffer.
I agree. I mean, I have a story about that in my book as well. I do think that it's a sign of great leadership when you're willing to share something difficult with someone. Because to your point, most people are going to avoid it and they're just going to move on and try to ignore it. When someone cares enough about you to have that difficult conversation, that's a sign that, first of all, they're very invested in you. And secondly, it's a sign of a good leader.
100%. Well, Angela, thank you for sharing that story and all of the others as well. The last thing I will ask, if any of the listeners would like to learn more about you, get in touch with you, perhaps get a copy of the book, would you like to point them towards a website where they can do that, or similar?
So you can get all of that information, set up a consultation, get the book, learn more about me on my website, which is broadoaksconsulting, all one word.com.
Excellent. Well, that's nice and easy to remember, but I'll pop it in the show notes as well so people can find it easily.
Great.
Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been lovely meeting you and talking with you today as well.
I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for the conversation.
No worries at all. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you again, Angela, for your time today. Really loved that conversation. Those of you watching it on YouTube, apologies. We did have a bit of an issue with connection speed and the video quality did suffer as a result. But I wanted to include it anyway because we did record it and it was there, and it's better than a blank screen, I think. So yes, apologies about that. Did the best we could, but sometimes the technology just doesn't work with you. Listeners and viewers, if you would like to learn more about Angela, check out the episode description. You'll find the links to do so. And as always, again, I encourage you to click on that, go and learn more about what Angela does, reach out to her, perhaps have a conversation, start building a relationship. That is what leadership is all about. So practice it as many times as you can, as often as you can. If you are new to leadership, if the subjects we've covered today or in past episodes are of interest to you, or perhaps there's something that you're having difficulty with at work right now, and you're looking for ways to improve your own leadership at work, join my online leadership community. Meet other leaders, network with people at similar stages of their career to you, get access to pretty much all of my leadership resources, including early access to these podcast episodes, and have the opportunity to attend regular live sessions on a particular subject each month. To get access to all of that and more, visit www.leadernotaboss.com. Sign up for the newsletter and you'll get invited to join the community for a complimentary 60-day trial, after which you can either become a subscriber or you can choose the free forever option, or you can simply leave the community if it's not for you. Any of those options are fine. Any of those are encouraged. All leaders are welcome. Hope to see you there very soon. Thank you so much for listening or watching today. I hope you will join us again next week when I'll be talking to Eileen Marcus about annoying people. That's what I'm going to say about that, because I feel like that is enough to get you interested. Join us next week and find out what that's all about. Hope to see you there. And in the meantime, have a great rest of your day, your week. And remember, be a leader, not a boss.